Margaret sat in the dimly lit office of her family lawyer, the somber hues reflecting the grief that clutched her heart. Across from her, Mr. Chambers, a man she'd known for decades, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confident demeanor dulled by the weight of the moment. The letter she held felt irrefutably heavy, a harbinger of truths she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Her fingers traced the edges of the envelope, the paper worn and softened by the many times it had been opened and reread in the days following Harold's funeral. The man she had married 40 years ago, her partner in a life filled with shared dreams and silent compromises, had left her with unimaginable revelations. "Margaret," Mr. Chambers began, his voice a cautious murmur, "I know this is difficult. But we need to talk about Harold's will." Margaret nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had agreed to this meeting, hoping for closure, yet dreading the consequences of what she might discover. Her mind wandered to a time long ago, when happiness seemed simpler. Their honeymoon in Niagara Falls had been filled with laughter, silly pictures, and long nights whispering dreams into the dark. Harold's promises back then had felt as solid as the rocks beneath the waterfall, unchanging amidst the torrents of life. Yet here she was, 40 years later, clutching a testament to an entirely different reality. The room seemed to shrink as Mr. Chambers laid out the details of the will. "The property, and the savings, they're mainly allotted to Jonathan," he continued, a hint of apology lacing his words. Her heart clenched at the mention of their son's name. Jonathan, her firstborn, had always been Harold's pride, yet over the years their relationship had soured, marred by disagreements, ambitions, and unspoken resentments. "How could Harold do this?" she whispered, finally finding her voice. Her eyes fixed on Mr. Chambers, searching for answers he couldn't possibly provide. "He always said we'd decide together. We talked about fairness, about the importance of equal support for both Jonathan and Sarah. I'm truly sorry, Margaret. Harold's decisions were unexpected." He hesitated, adding quietly, "I'm not sure he intended for things to unfold this way." Unexpected. The word rang hollow, a ghost of intentions that perhaps even Harold hadn't fully comprehended. Betrayal lurked in the corners of her mind, tinting memories with suspicion. What had Harold been thinking? Was this a part of some unspoken promise between father and son, or a late-life manipulation Jonathan had carefully orchestrated? The revelation felt like a fresh wound, bleeding into the narrative of her life. She imagined Jonathan, sitting with his father, perhaps in this very office, deliberating over assets as if plotting in secret. She felt a rush of anger, not just at Harold, but at Jonathan too, for the son who grew distant, who always seemed to favor his father's ambitions over her nurtured dreams for him. Yet the anger was intertwined with a profound sadness. After Harold's passing, the family had gathered, united in grief, their shared history weaving them closer than they had been for years. Margaret had clung to that unity, believing it would help her navigate the loneliness that crept in when she realized she could never again discuss the little things with Harold, the weather, the neighbors, or even the way the old house creaked at night. But now it felt shattered, a cruel illusion that evaporated with the reading of a will. Alone, after the meeting, Margaret returned home, the quiet of her once lively home only amplifying the chasm Harold's absence had left. She wandered through the house, each room echoing with memories: the nursery where their children took their first steps, the kitchen where countless meals had been shared, the living room where they argued, laughed, and loved. Margaret stopped by the mantelpiece, her eyes lingering on the wedding photo that had presided over decades of family life. Her reflection stared back, lined with the marks of time, eyes now shadowed with doubts. She found herself questioning the years gone by. Had those promises, those moments of happiness, been real? Or had they been merely perceived truths, swept away by the cruel revelation of a single document? For the first time since Harold's passing, Margaret allowed herself to cry. The tears flowed freely, unchecked, as she sank into the armchair that still carried his scent, the scent of a life shared. She wept for the future she had imagined, for the partnership she had trusted, for the family she so desperately wanted to hold together. Yet as the tears subsided, an unfamiliar resolve began to surface. Margaret knew she had choices to make, just as Harold had once made his. But unlike him, she was determined to face them head-on. She would confront Jonathan about his part in this betrayal, perhaps seeking explanations, or at the very least, clarity. And she would reach out to Sarah, her daughter, to find the support and understanding she needed to navigate this fractured family dynamic. In the quiet of her home, surrounded by relics of a life immersed in both love and deception, Margaret realized something profound: betrayal need not define the entirety of her life's narrative. She embraced the possibility of a new beginning, one that might include forgiveness and reconciliation, a late-life restart that promised its own brand of hope. Determined, Margaret rose from the armchair, wiping the remnants of tears from her cheeks. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, fraught with challenges and painful truths. But in that moment, she embraced it, knowing that the woman who stared back at her from the mantelpiece photo, young and hopeful, would have wanted her to. She turned towards the door, ready to face what came next with a renewed sense of purpose. Margaret stood at the threshold of her living room, a place that had once resonated with the comforting chaos of family life. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the wave of memories that threatened to pull her under. Her resolve to confront Jonathan and reach out to Sarah felt like a fragile lifeline, one that she clung to as she began to piece together a semblance of a plan. The clock in the hall ticked softly, marking the hours since the lawyer's revelation. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the house, Margaret picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. She hoped her daughter would have the time to listen, to offer the comfort and insight that only she could provide. "Mom?" Sarah's voice came through, a soothing balm that eased some of Margaret's tension. "Hi, sweetheart," Margaret replied, trying to keep her voice even. "I was wondering if you could come by for a chat. There's something we need to discuss." "Of course, Mom. Is everything all right?" Sarah's concern was palpable, her tone laced with the empathy that had always defined her. "It's complicated," Margaret admitted. "But it's important. I'll be there as soon as I can," Sarah promised before hanging up. The anticipation of Sarah's visit brought with it a mix of hope and anxiety. Margaret paced the living room, her mind racing through the conversation to come. She knew she had to remain calm, to present the facts without letting her emotions cloud the dialogue. Yet the ache of betrayal lingered, a persistent reminder of the chasm that had opened between her and her children. When the doorbell finally rang, Margaret's heart gave a little leap. She hurried to open the door, greeting Sarah with a tight hug that conveyed both love and urgency. As they settled into the living room, Margaret took a moment to study her daughter. Sarah's hazel eyes were filled with empathy, her expression warm and open. "Mom, you look like you've been through the ringer," Sarah observed, her gaze searching Margaret's face for answers. "I suppose I have," Margaret conceded with a weary smile. "There's something about Dad's will that I need to discuss with you." Sarah listened intently as Margaret recounted the meeting with Mr. Chambers, the unexpected revelation of Harold's decisions, and her own swirling mix of emotions. As she spoke, she watched the array of emotions flicker across Sarah's face: confusion, anger, sadness. "I can't believe Dad would make such decisions without consulting you," Sarah said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It doesn't feel right." "I know," Margaret replied, grateful for Sarah's understanding. "I don't know how or why he did this, but I have to believe there was a reason. Maybe Jonathan knows more than we do." "Have you spoken to him yet?" Sarah asked, her tone cautious. "Not yet," Margaret admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first. I need to approach this carefully, to understand what Jonathan was thinking." Sarah nodded, a thoughtful expression settling on her features. "I'll stay here with you, Mom. We can both talk to him together. Maybe we can piece this puzzle together." The suggestion offered a glimmer of hope amidst the uncertainty that had taken root in Margaret's heart. She squeezed Sarah's hand, grateful for her daughter's unwavering support. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. They spent the afternoon discussing potential scenarios, preparing themselves for the conversation with Jonathan. As evening descended, bringing with it the quiet hum of crickets from the garden, Margaret felt a renewed sense of determination. She had her daughter by her side, and together, they would face whatever truths awaited them. The next day, Margaret called Jonathan, asking him to come over for a family discussion. His response was hesitant, but he agreed to visit later in the week. As the days passed, Margaret and Sarah filled the house with warmth and laughter, finding solace in each other's company. They cooked together, shared stories, and reminisced about happier times, strengthening their bond and building emotional resilience for the confrontation ahead. When Jonathan finally stood at their doorstep, Margaret's heart raced with both trepidation and anticipation. He looked older, more worn than she remembered, his eyes shadowed with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite read. Margaret invited him in, and they settled into the living room where the air felt thick with unspoken words. "Mom, Sarah," he greeted them, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge. "What's going on?" Margaret exchanged a glance with Sarah before taking a deep breath. "Jonathan, we need to talk about Dad's will. There are some things that came as a surprise to us, and I was hoping you could provide some clarity." Jonathan's gaze flickered with something between regret and defiance. "I figured this would come up," he said, his tone guarded. "Did you know about Dad's decision?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle yet firm. Jonathan hesitated, running a hand through his hair as he searched for words. "I knew some of it, yes. Dad and I had conversations about the future, about what he wanted for the family." "But why?" Margaret pressed, her heart aching for understanding. "Why keep it from me?" Jonathan sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the conversation. "Dad didn't want to burden you with the details. He thought it would be easier for all of us if the decisions were made without disagreements." "Easier?" Margaret echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "Jonathan, this isn't easier. It feels like betrayal." "I know, and I'm sorry," Jonathan replied, his voice rising with frustration. "I tried to tell him we should talk to you, that it wasn't right to exclude you. But Dad was stubborn, convinced he was doing the best for everyone." The room fell silent, each of them grappling with Harold's misguided intentions. Jonathan's stance softened, his expression shifting from defiance to regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing by honoring his wishes," Jonathan admitted. "I didn't want to cause more pain, especially after he was gone." Margaret studied Jonathan, seeing in him both the man he had become and the boy she had raised. The pain of Harold's decisions was deep, but she sensed a sincerity in Jonathan's words that tugged at her heart. "Jonathan, I need you to understand how this affects us all," Margaret said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "We need to work through this together, not let it tear us apart." Sarah nodded in agreement, reaching out to hold Jonathan's hand. "We're still a family, Jonathan. Despite everything, we can find a way forward." The atmosphere in the room felt charged with a blend of hope and uncertainty. Jonathan's eyes met Margaret's, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of the boy who had once sought her approval at every turn. "I'm willing to try," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "I never wanted to hurt you, either of you. Maybe we can start by talking about what Dad really intended." Margaret nodded, feeling the first true stirrings of reconciliation. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, conversations yet to be had, and emotions untangled, but they were not impossible. Together, they would navigate the complexities of inheritance and intentions, seeking to mend the fractures Harold's decisions had wrought. As the evening wore on, the three of them talked, tears mingling with laughter as they began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. They shared memories of Harold, stories that painted him as both a loving father and a man bound by his own vision of what was right. In those hours, they found a renewed connection, a promise to face the future as a united family, even amidst the shadows of the past. Margaret knew the journey was far from over. There were still difficult decisions to be made and wounds to heal, but with Sarah and Jonathan by her side, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in months. As she bid her children good night, watching them leave with the lingering warmth of their presence in her home, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She stood by the window, looking out at the darkened garden, feeling the cool breeze wash over her. A tentative feeling of peace settled in her heart, not a resolution but a beginning. Margaret knew she would have to face Harold's legacy, reconcile the memories of love and betrayal, and forge a path forward that honored not just his intentions but her own desires for her family. Her new beginning was palpable, a quiet promise that she would not only survive but thrive, embracing the challenges and joys of her life, one step at a time. In the days that followed their emotional conversation, Margaret found herself trying to reconcile her feelings of betrayal with the possibility of understanding. The challenge lay not only in unraveling Harold's intentions but also in rebuilding her relationship with Jonathan. Though progress had been made, she knew there remained an invisible barrier still fraught with unresolved feelings. Margaret decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air might clear her head. The gentle rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of children playing brought a semblance of serenity to her turbulent thoughts. As she wandered along familiar paths, her mind drifted back to the early days of her marriage, to the promise of forever that had seemed so solid. The weight of Harold's absence was a constant presence, a reminder of the years spent side by side. Yet, as Margaret reflected on their life together, she also began to acknowledge the layers of complexity that defined their relationship. Love had been the foundation, but it had also been built on a web of compromise and unspoken truths, some of which had only come to light with Harold's passing. Leaving the park, Margaret resolved to visit the family home, a once vibrant house now standing empty. It was a place filled with echoes of laughter and arguments, and she needed to face it, to confront both the memories and the ghosts that resided within its walls. She felt a tug of nostalgia as she unlocked the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges a welcoming sound. Inside, a cold silence greeted her, the absence of life palpable in the dust particles dancing in the slanting sunlight. Margaret wandered through the rooms, each one a vessel holding the chronicles of her family's history. The kitchen table, where family discussions unfolded and everyday decisions were made, stood as a silent witness to decades of growth and challenge. As she walked through the halls, Margaret was struck by a sense of both loss and gratitude. These walls had seen the evolution of her family, had heard the tender whispers of bedtime stories and the resonant laughter during holiday gatherings. Standing in what had once been Jonathan's room, she found an old baseball glove, its surface worn and familiar. It reminded her of the boy who had idolized his father, the boy she had hoped would carry forward the values of honesty and integrity. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, the glove resting in her lap. She thought about the conversation with Jonathan, about his attempt to honor his father's wishes even when they conflicted with his own sense of right. She understood his struggle, the pressure of expectations placed upon him by a man he deeply admired. Maybe Harold, in his quest to provide, had forgotten that fairness required openness and understanding. As she left Jonathan's room, Margaret felt a renewed sense of determination. She would talk to Jonathan again, delve deeper into his perspective, and together they would find a way to honor Harold's legacy without dismissing their own truths. The afternoon slipped into evening by the time she returned home, her mind set on the task ahead. She picked up the phone and called Jonathan, inviting him over for dinner. Her voice held a warmth that had been missing before, an indication of her willingness to bridge the gaps that time and misunderstanding had carved. Jonathan arrived, his demeanor a mix of apprehension and hope. As they sat down to dinner, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air, an aura of tentative peace settled over them. Margaret watched her son, noting the traces of Harold in his features, the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. Yet, there was also something uniquely Jonathan, a softness that danced in his expressions. "Thank you for coming," Margaret began after a few moments of silence. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I want to understand more about your discussions with Dad." Jonathan paused, his fork hovering over his plate, before setting it down gently. "I've been thinking too, Mom. About everything. I guess I never really questioned Dad's decisions. I trusted him, wanted to believe he had everyone's best interests at heart. Margaret nodded, understanding the complexities of admiration and authority. I know, and I think he did, in his own way. But we can't let that overshadow our need for honesty with each other. I want us to make decisions together, as a family. Jonathan's gaze softened, an unspoken gratitude silently acknowledged between them. That's what I want too, Mom. Maybe we can start by reviewing the will, understanding why Dad made the choices he did. The suggestion was like a window opening, allowing fresh air to circulate through the staleness of unresolved tension. They agreed to meet with Mr. Chambers again, to seek clarity and to devise a plan that respected Harold's wishes while also addressing their own needs. In the following weeks, Margaret, Jonathan, and Sarah committed to the process of exploring the intricacies of the inheritance. They reviewed financial documents, sought advice, and engaged in heartfelt discussions. Margaret made it clear that she valued their input, insisting that decisions be made collectively. Her determination to foster a sense of belonging and participation within the family was unwavering. As they worked through the complexities of Harold's will, they also uncovered letters Harold had written but never sent. Each letter revealed snippets of his thoughts, moments of vulnerability he had chosen not to share during his lifetime. Margaret found comfort in his words, seeing clearly the love and fear that had guided his decisions. Together, the family began to piece together a new narrative, one that embraced both past mistakes and future possibilities. They made plans to renovate the family home, intending to transform it into a welcoming retreat for family gatherings. Margaret felt a sense of purpose in the task, as if she were weaving a new tapestry from threads of old and new. Throughout this journey, Margaret and Jonathan spent more time together, sharing stories and dreams, filling the spaces once occupied by Harold with renewed connection. They learned to navigate their differences, finding strength in their shared history and growing trust. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jonathan turned to Margaret, his eyes reflecting the golden hues of the fading light. Mom, I want you to know how much I appreciate your patience and understanding. It's been challenging, finding my footing after everything. Margaret reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We're all finding our way, Jonathan. And I know your dad would be proud of the man you've become. It's not about perfection but growth, about building something better than before. His expression softened, a mixture of relief and affection in his gaze. I just hope I can live up to that. Margaret smiled, her heart swelling with pride. You already are, my dear. We all are. Their path was not yet complete, filled with the demands of daily life and the echoes of Harold's legacy. But Margaret felt a peace growing within, an understanding that the journey was as significant as the destination. With each step, she released a bit more of the past, making room for the possibilities of the future. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Margaret looked up, feeling Harold's presence in the whisper of the wind and the rustle of the leaves. She knew he would always be a part of them, a reminder of the love and complexity that defined their family. And with that thought, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in the resilience of her spirit and the strength of her rebuilding family. As the renovation of the family home neared completion, Margaret found herself feeling a blend of anticipation and nostalgia. The house had transformed into a beacon of new beginnings, not just structurally, but emotionally. Every coat of paint and polished floorboard seemed to signify a layer of healing that had taken place within her and her family. The first gathering at the newly renovated house was planned to coincide with the upcoming Thanksgiving. The decision was intentional, a symbolic coming together to celebrate not only the holiday but the resilience and unity they had found. Margaret was determined to create an atmosphere filled with warmth and acceptance, hoping to weave together the past and the future in a tapestry of shared experiences. As the day approached, the house teemed with the kind of busy preparation that Margaret had missed terribly. She reveled in the sound of laughter echoing through the kitchen, where Sarah and Jonathan helped prepare the meal, their banter and camaraderie the lifeblood of the occasion. Even the familiar smell of turkey roasting in the oven was laden with memories, a reminder of years past when Harold had carved the bird with theatrical flair and an ever-present twinkle in his eye. As guests began to arrive, extended family, friends, and neighbors, they brought with them a joyous energy that filled the house with life. Margaret moved through the rooms, greeting each guest with genuine affection, her heart swelling with gratitude for this second chance at togetherness. Later, as everyone gathered around the table, Margaret took a moment to look at the faces of those she loved. The room was alive with conversations, the clinking of glasses, and bursts of laughter. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, one that surpassed the simple joys of the day and touched on something deeper, a recognition of the strength and love that had carried them through the most trying times. As the Thanksgiving meal was served, Margaret raised her glass, signaling for a moment of shared reflection. "I want to thank each of you for being here today," she began, her voice carrying the sincerity of her emotions. "This house and this family have seen so much joy, sorrow, growth, and healing. I couldn't be more grateful for the love and resilience that binds us together." Jonathan, sitting next to her, raised his own glass in solidarity. "To new beginnings and honoring the memories of those who aren't with us," he added, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand as she echoed the sentiment, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The toast was met with a chorus of agreement and clinking glasses, the moment resonant with shared understanding and hope. As they began to eat, Margaret felt a lightness in her heart, as if a weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She watched her family and friends, the bonds between them vibrant and strong, and knew that they had indeed found a way forward. After dinner, as everyone relaxed into the comfortable rhythm of post-meal conversation, Margaret found herself sitting on the porch, the quiet night a soothing balm against the backdrop of celebration. She was soon joined by Sarah, who slipped into the chair beside her, a serene smile gracing her lips. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah remarked, her gaze sweeping across the moonlit yard. "It is," Margaret agreed, her voice soft with contentment. "I feel like I can finally breathe again, like we've turned a corner." Sarah nodded, resting her head against her mother's shoulder. "I think Dad would have loved this," she said quietly. "He'd be proud of how we've come together, despite everything." Margaret felt the familiar warmth of Harold's memory resonating within her. "I hope so," she replied, her voice filled with affection. "I like to think he's watching over us, feeling a part of it all." They fell into a comfortable silence, the night enveloping them in a shared sense of peace. Margaret felt a deep gratitude for the journey, for the challenges that had ultimately brought them closer and the opportunities for growth and reconciliation they had embraced. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret and Sarah returned inside, where the laughter and conversation continued to flow freely. Jonathan caught Margaret's eye, and together they shared a moment of mutual recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the path they had walked and the future they were building. In the midst of all, Margaret remembered the letters she had discovered among Harold's belongings. She had decided to share them, hoping they would serve as a bridge between Harold's intentions and the family's current reality. As the evening began to wind down, she gathered everyone in the living room and explained the decision. "I found these letters Harold wrote," she began, her voice tender with both sadness and anticipation. "He never sent them, but I believe they hold the sentiments he couldn't express in life. I'd like to read them, if you're all willing." There was unanimous assent, a shared curiosity tinged with the bittersweet longing for connection with the man they had lost. As Margaret read aloud, tears flowed freely, each letter unveiling layers of Harold's love, his fears, and his hopes for their family. In his words, they rediscovered a man striving to balance duty and affection, the enormity of his love for them intricately woven into each sentence. The letters served as the final piece of the puzzle, the bridge that connected past and present. They provided closure and clarity, and with them, the family found the comfort of knowing that Harold's intentions had always been rooted in love, even if his decisions had sometimes been misguided. As the night deepened, the family lingered in the living room, held together by the shared stories and the embrace of collective healing. Margaret felt a profound sense of fulfillment, her heart filled with gratitude for the opportunity to reconnect and redefine their family's narrative. When the last guest had departed and the house fell into a peaceful quiet, Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, reflecting on the day. She felt Harold's presence with her, an echo of the love that had been the foundation of their life together. She knew the journey was theirs to continue, a tapestry of new beginnings interwoven with cherished memories. Margaret turned off the lights, leaving the warmth of family and love lingering in the air as she went to bed, feeling a deep-seated contentment she hadn't known was possible. The future was unwritten, filled with the promise of new experiences, and she embraced it with open arms, ready for whatever came next. Her heart was light, her spirit renewed, and in that moment, as she drifted off to sleep, Margaret knew she had found her peace.